Alright, so this is essentially where we're at in this stage, is that we have the object hitting our building, and the building shatters, and it blows up into a bunch of pieces. Everything is cached at this point, so I can scrub through the timeline, and you can see that you have pretty neat looking animation. There we go. So what I want to do is I want to disable my fluid, because at this point we're not dealing with the fluid anymore. So I'm just going to go to my fluid, go to my fluid cache, and then I can just turn that off. And that way it'll stop being enabled. Also note you have some scaling properties in here too, so you can obviously scale the fluid speed up or down depending on what you want to do. You can also reverse it. Just enable it so you can see it. So that now it's going back into there. Okay, so not really applicable in this state, but it's still there nonetheless. Now, when you do disable this, you want to do it at a frame where there's nothing there, because if I disable it here, you'll see that it still stays on throughout the duration of this, and it's actually trying to calculate that cache as we go. So just rewind it, disable it, and then I'm also going to go back to the very beginning of this under my fluid shape and disable my evaluation on that too. Okay, so now if I were to hit play, I'm simply left with the shattering bullet effect. Alright, the next thing we want to do in this is that we have a lot of debris here, and the debris doesn't really have any trails following it, and there should be some sort of smoke trail or something that's following along it, because that's what would happen. We would have some smoke or gravel or cement or whatever it is kind of following it. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to grab the building and I need to emit particles from this building. Okay, so I'm going to go under my FX. I'm going to go to end particles, and they have these, just so you can see the other area, there's legacy particles down here, and then there's regular end particles up here. For this we can just use the legacy particles. So I'm going to say emit from object. So if I were to hit play now, you'll see what we get is that there's particles being emitted from every one of these surfaces. And as I hit play, you can see we kind of get the effect that we were looking for, where we have these trails following each piece of geometry, which in itself is pretty cool, but then we want to do other stuff to this, because obviously at the beginning we don't want this to be emitting smoke inside here. Now we can't just go over here to the right and keyframe it, because what would happen is, let's say I set a key here, and then I went up to, let's just say about there. Okay, and I put this to 100. And then I'm going to grab my graph editor and just set these to, come on, doesn't want to frame, oh well. I'm just going to set my keys to be stepped like that, so that it just turns on at that point. So we get 0. My hotkeys have stopped working. Alright. So we get 0, and then boom, we get some sort of explosion. So that seems like it's working pretty good. However, all the pieces are giving the same emission. And, this part here, let me go to one of these pieces on the ground. This piece here that's barely moving is giving off a whole lot of smoke. A lot more, well actually the same, as a piece that's flying through the air or just got hit. And we can't really see it too good, but there's also pieces that are not even moving that are also giving off that emission too. Okay, so for that, it really doesn't do what we want it to do. Okay, so what I need to do is I need to tell these particles that I only want them to emit when they're moving. Okay, and that's actually an option we can set. So I'm just going to set this rate, just delete the keyframes on there and set it back to, let's say, 10 for now. Now if I hit play, you'll see that there's particles being emitted from everywhere. Okay, now this is an omni emitter. If I set this to a surface emitter, because this is a surface, you'll see that there's only 10 total particles that get emitted for each second. I'll put this up to 500 just so we can see that happen a little bit easier. There we go. Okay, so what's happening here is that we have all of these particles shooting around randomly around these pieces of the building. Okay, so what I want them to do is I want actually two particle systems. One, this one, I want to stay attached to these pieces. Okay, I basically want to emit them, attach them to the pieces, and then leave them there. And then what I want to happen is that as these pieces are moving through space, these particles are following them. And then I can use these particles that are going out there to actually emit other particles. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewind this. I'm going to grab my particles, I'm going to shift click the building, and I'm going to go under the end particle and somewhere, goal, there we go. So there's a goal right here. So on the goal, if I click that, what it's going to do is it's going to take these particles and it's going to make them attached to that building. Okay, now we get a geoconnector, and it has resilience, which is bounciness, and friction, which is stickiness. I'm just going to turn the friction up and resilience off. Okay, I'm also going to go to the particles, and in their particle shape attribute editor, there's a goal tab. Okay, and I want this goal shape here, this weight, to be 1. That way it sticks right to it. So now when I hit play, you'll see that certain areas of this have particles that are now attaching themselves to the building. Okay, and again, it's kind of flowing as we're going because it's emitting random particles. So if I go under my building here, there's an emitter. Just to make it a little bit more obvious, I'll take my rate down to like 10. I'll take this emitter type over to Omni again and hit play. And you'll see that the second I hit play, we get all of these particles here. The way that Omni works is it actually goes to where the vertices are and it emits from the vertices. Okay, so once it's emitted, it's basically there. Okay, it's still emitting, and it's basically emitting on top of other particles. But you can see how now each piece has particles attached to that piece, which is pretty awesome. Okay, now what I don't need is I don't need more particles after the fact. Okay, so if I just set this to 1, let's say, and let it play through, eventually within the 30 frames, there we go, at frame 26 we got some. Okay, so what I can do is just go to, like, let's say 3 and just go frame by frame. There we go, until we get particles happening on this surface. Then I can grab the particles and under solvers, initial state, there it is, set for selected. Okay, so now when I rewind this, you'll see that we are set right there. So then I can just go to my emitter, turn the rate, off, and now when I hit play, you'll see that we still have particles and they're still stuck on each one of these pieces, which is pretty awesome. Okay, so that's all that first step was. We need to get particles attached to the building, and we need to get them to be stuck where they're at. Okay, so basically each particle is attached to each piece, and then what we can do is we can grab the particles and have the particles figure out how fast they're moving, and then emit more particles in those instances. Okay, so let's do that. So now I'm going to grab the particles, which are right here, and I'm going to go to my particles again. Now here, I don't need to use these legacy particles anymore. We can come up here and use the actual end particles. All right, so I'm going to just say emit from object here. And now when I rewind this and I hit play, what we're going to see is that we have a bunch of end particles emitting from those spots. Okay, so there's a bunch of particles emitting from those particles. So I'm going to take the rate down for now just to like 10, just so it goes a bit quicker. Actually, let's do like 5. Okay, so we're getting basically like a similar look to this that we had before. Now with this rate as low as 5, you can see that we're getting these like little openings basically here and here. That won't happen when we're all cranked up. Okay. All right, so now what we want to do is we want to adjust this a little bit more. So I'm going to grab the particles. I'm going to go to my end particles. I'm going to say per point emission rates. Okay. Now what that's going to do is inside of my particle here, okay, not the end particle, the original one, I get this emitter 2 rate pp. I can right click on it and I can do a runtime before or after dynamics expression. All right, so what this is going to do is that we're going to use an expression to control the movement. All right, so if I pull open this tab here, here's an expression right here that basically takes the particle's speed, or sorry, takes the particle's velocity right here, and it figures out the magnitude, which is essentially the speed. And it says if the speed is less than 15, then the rate should be 0. Otherwise, the rate should be 100. There we go. So what I have to do before I can do this is I need to create a per particle attribute called speed. And then I can assign this information to it. Okay. So now what a per particle attribute is a way for me to get information about each particle. So Maya will actually write information out about each particle that's inside here. So inside the attribute editor for particle shape 1, I'm going to go down to the general tab, or the add dynamic attributes, and click the general button. On here, I'm going to add a per particle array, and I'm going to call it speed, and hit OK. So now we have this speed attribute. Okay, so now if I go to my rate and I do a runtime after dynamics expression, and I go to my formula, there it is, and I copy it from velocity here all the way down to the emitter rate 100, and then I shrink this down and I paste it. And then I'm just going to have to update some of my values here, because if I just hit create, it's not going to know what these controllers are, because they called their particle shape velocity particle shape. Mine is called particle shape 1. So if I just rename this to particle shape 1 dot speed equals the magnitude, shouldn't be a space there, of particle shape 1 dot velocity. Okay, so then it's going to say if particle shape 1 dot speed is less than 15, then the rate's going to be 0. Okay, otherwise the rate's going to be 100. Now for this, under the particle, you see it says emitter 2. That's the one I want to control. So emitter 2 is going to be the one that gets controlled, not emitter 1, because emitter 1 brought these guys out. Emitter 2 is the one that's emitting the other stuff. So I hit create. It accepted it. If there was an error, I would go back and try to figure out where I have a typo. Sometimes it could be I forgot a letter, or I forgot a number, or I didn't put the equal sign, or I don't have a semicolon. So just double check your spelling. All right, so now if we rewind this, I go into wireframe so I can see it better, and we hit play. We'll see that they're still emitting particles. Okay. Now when we set up that expression, we put it, let me go back to my expression editor. Choose by expression name, click there. Runtime after dynamics, there we go. We told it to be emitter 2 rate. Okay, so that's emitter 2, that's the rate. But what we didn't take into account is that we have a per particle emission. Basically, each one of these particles is its own emitter. So we have a separate control that we can do. So if I go to the attribute editor, you'll see we have this emitter 2 rate pp. Okay. So let me see if I can type this correctly. Emitter 2 dot rate pp. All right, let me get the actual name. So I'm just going to right click and go to expression after dynamics. Emitter 2. No. Because it's called particle shape 1 dot emitter rate 2 emitter 2 rate pp. Okay, so I should be able to copy that and paste it, and there we go. So let's try that out. Okay, and look what happens here is that we get frame 1, there's nothing obviously. Frame 2, nothing. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's no emission on here until it gets hit. Okay, now once it gets hit, you can see it happening. You can see the little pink in there. Those are my new particles being emitted. And you can see how much is coming out of the top and how very little is coming out of the bottom. Okay, because there's so much movement here, we're getting a lot of emission on each one of those things. Okay, so we just let it play out. There we go. And eventually, what's going to happen is that we're going to be able to see, you know, a lot of smoky stuff happening here. And you can see very, very little stuff is actually happening down there. You can see all that smoke here. So now that we have this, let's start to customize what this looks like. So I'm going to grab my end particles. I'm going to go into their shading. There we go. And right now they're set to points. So I can leave them as points, but I think I'd rather have them as cloud, which is going to take a second to update. There we go, it's updated. And then I can take this, I can take the threshold, the opacity down, but I think I'm good right now. Okay, so let's go to lifespan. And lifespan up here is basically how long these particles are living. So right now it's live forever, so they're going to live forever. But I can change this also to like a random range. Okay. So this is all in seconds. So if I say that they're going to live 1 second, which is what that's set to, they'll live for 1 second. And they'll all stop. But it's nice to have a little randomness in here. Okay, so like 0.5 and 0.5. And then what we're going to get is you'll see that as they hit, that they're going to start to die off. So they're not going to be alive forever. Okay. Now what we're seeing here too, if you watch this kind of closely, you're going to see that the particles pop a little bit. The things move and then particles are emitted. So it moves. Maybe. There it goes. And then particles get emitted behind it. Okay. That's the expression happening after the dynamics. So what I can do is go back to my particle here, go back to the shape, go to my after dynamics expression, cut this, and delete it. Then go to the before dynamics and paste it in. Okay, now what that's going to do is that it should give us just a little bit more accurate representation of this. Now this is also happening pretty quick, and we still haven't adjusted some of the other parameters. So, you know, it's not a huge deal, but let's see if we can tweak it. All right. So that's all right for now. Okay. So now let's go back to end particle 1. Let's go to our particle size. And right now they have a default radius of 0.2. So everything is 0.2. If we zoom in, you'll see it's all 0.2. Okay. So what I can do is come down here to randomize, and I can randomize it. Now you'll see nothing gets randomized. I'm going to do a couple things. One, I'm going to set this to randomize. Well, I can set it to age, just so you can see that. And so the particles that are first born are going to be 1 age, and then as they get older, they're going to shrink down. Okay. I can also set this to a randomized ID, so that it just randomly assigns different particles different weights. So it's always good to kind of play around with some of that stuff. And then the particle ID is basically like wherever the particle's number is, it would assign it on this graph. I don't want that. So I like the, even the speed could work too, because the faster they're moving, the bigger they would be. Okay, now we can also increase the radius here. So they're nice and smoky. Okay, and this is again based on speed. So you want to try them out and see which ones you're liking inside here. Okay, we could also play with this graph, you know, if you wanted to tweak their size at certain points. Okay, basically the far left is the maximum, and then the far left or the far right is the minimum. So the really fast ones are going to be up here, and the really slow ones are going to be down there. Okay. So let's see, what else can we play with. We can tell it to ignore gravity. We may not want the particles to kind of fall downward. We may want them to kind of like lift up a little bit. There's some drag on here, which is good. Maybe a little bit of damping on that, 0.05. That should be good for now. Okay, so now let's go down to the shading area. And in here, we're dealing with something very similar to what we dealt with on the fluids. We have opacity scale. Okay, so the start of the particles is going to be right now opaque, and the end of them will be transparent. So I'm going to set this to, let's say, the age of the particles. And then we can randomize that a bit too. All right. And then we can go to color and do something very similar. So let's go here and say at the start of the particles, just so we can see it will be red, and then the end of the particles will be blue. All right. So right now it's set to constant, so whatever the far right value is that. So once I set this to age, then it's going to use this as its guide. So right now red is the key value. And then as I hit play and these particles are moving along, we'll see less and less of the red and more of the blue and purple happening. Okay, so it's very cool how Maya does that kind of stuff. All right, so we can go to normalized age, and this is just a different way for it to calculate the age of the particles. Again, you kind of play with things and look at it and see what you're liking. Again, we can do speed. So faster particles are going to be red, and then slower particles will be blue. Obviously, we can randomize it again so that it's not a consistent color, because you always want to add some sort of randomness to it. There we go. And now that I'm seeing this, maybe I want to take the... I'm going to go to emitter 2 and maybe take this rate down to 10. No, it's not really affecting it because we have that per point. So I have to go back to that particle 1, go back to that expression, after dynamics, no, before, I changed it. And then I'm just going to change this 100 for now to, let's say, 30. That way I can get a little quicker playback. Okay, and then I can kind of customize what this looks like. So again, I'll go back to my end particles, and I'm going to take this radius down some. So 0.5 here. Yeah, it definitely looks better. Yeah, 0.5 is good. Okay, cool. And under forces, I just saw it. Oh, it's force field. Rotation. Rotation there. We could add some wind and stuff. We need to play with those. Viscosity, no. Surface tension, no. Alright, that's good there. Okay. So let's give it some real colors. So we can just go with maybe like a brown. That. Now this one is looking like it's backwards in the fact that the left side is now the slower ones, and the right side is the faster ones. Just swap those. And I'm just going to grab this. There we go. Okay. Again, add a little more randomness to it. I think I want to take my scale right here, my radius scale, and pull it down a bit. I'm going to just do this based on the age. I guess speed was good, I just had it backwards. I'll just pull this one up, pull that one down. And you can see how quick this is where you're just kind of tweaking these settings. So you don't have to worry too much about it taking forever to calculate it, because it does do a pretty good job of being able to adjust it on the fly. Alright, cool. So there we go. So now we have our particles here. And again, we can rewind this. Hit play. Preview things, see how it's going. See what we're liking, see what we're not. And again, it is jumping because of how fast these are moving. So you can see there is a little bit of a delay still in them coming out. Okay, now we can correct that a little bit when we go to our nucleus. So if we go up to our N cache and we create a new N cache for our N object, just like before in the fluids, we can evaluate every 0.2 frames. We can do 1 frame per file. We can call this smoke or whatever. Save every 1 evaluations, and then we could hit create and let it go and do its thing. And then when we get done with that, then what we would have is this nice explosion where this is all cached. And then we should have everything kind of linked up together. And then what's also nice about this is all these pieces here that are on the ground, as they come to rest, we'll see that they actually stop emitting stuff. Okay, so like that piece right there, you can see how he just stopped emitting stuff. Now we could go even further with a lot of this if we, if this was movie time to play with this, is that we could actually have, as they hit the ground, they would emit other things, like they might emit sparks, or they might emit more smoke because it's hitting the ground and doing items like that. But for this, I just want you to just be able to do the basic of that. Now we can also go to the nucleus and adjust some of these settings too, because I think we probably want to add some wind noise in here. Just because it looks a little bit too static in how this is kind of shooting out. Okay, now we could also grab these N particles and anything under the fields, okay, these ones up here, we can add to it. So I can add a turbulence field to this. Where are they at? There he is. I can take the attenuation off. You just hit play. And what that's going to do is just kind of shake it up a little bit, just like it did on the fluid effect. So we don't get a too static of a particle system. Okay, we can also take the magnitude up some just to kind of emphasize that this is working or verify that it's working. There we go. Okay, now because the added magnitude went up, remember we set some of those to be controlled by speed. So now they're moving faster, so they're going to be a different color. So I may want to grab the end particles, change their radius based on speed, should be fine. I can pull that max up some. And that'll help kind of pull that down. 5's probably good there. And this here, 10 seems to be good. Yeah, that's good there. Okay, there's no incandescence on this one. Okay, now you could also have these particles emit a fluid effect, or whatever. You could have particles obviously emit particles, but you can have those particles emit more particles and have everyone do something. Okay, I could even have another fluid effect happening here that after it gets hit by the building has this cloud that just kind of sits here and then falls down. So I could add that on top of that as well. All right, so let me save. Check when I'll render it. Alright, and then I go all the way, but you can see what the end result is looking like. Okay. Now, if we couple that with a little bit of motion blur, this would look, obviously extra nice inside the scene. Add some camera moves. Where's my motion blur? If we stop moving stuff around, it'd be a lot easier to find it. Motion blur right in front of my face. I'm looking for a motion blur tab, and I keep seeing shutter. Yeah, so we can do full motion blur on this, and then we would actually get some nice blending happening between these particles instead of actually being able to see the individual particles themselves. Now, just so you're aware, on every kind of out of the ordinary piece of geometry under render stats, you do have to make sure that the motion blur box is checked. And if you have reflections or refractions, those also have to be checked if you want reflections and refractions. Okay. So now let's go back to our fluid. Pretend we just cache this out. I can turn that back on, go to my cache for the fluid, turn that back on, hit play. There we go. Okay, so pick that up right there. And now we can see the big fireball inside and see all this stuff here. We could also go to the particles just so you see it. And for the color, we started off with this darker color. We could have started off with, kind of like that orange lit fire color. Swap these around. We'll add another color in here, like red. Yeah, we can play with that input max. We can also just pull this back too. Alright, so now the pieces are on fire and flying through the air, as opposed to just being smoke. So again, more and more options you can play with to really customize the look of this. Alright, so it's pretty cool how we can just with a couple sliders manipulate this shape. Alright, So that's it for this video. Obviously, it was not as long as some of the other ones, but it's pretty effective in what we can do to kind of stagger this stuff. Now, the next step in this whole process is going to be rendering this stuff out. And to do that, we're going to want to use render layers. Okay, fly through the fire. We will be going over that in the next vid.